Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about some of the very best DLCs for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires from a value perspective, or the best DLCs for Warhammer 3 in general from a value perspective. Now at the moment, for the next day or so, there is a major Steam sale going on, and you can get most if not all of these DLCs at a fairly significant discount. Like many of them will be at a 50% discount when we're thinking about the Warhammer 2 DLC in particular. So if you're interested in playing certain DLC Legendary Lords or races, then now is probably a really good time to do so if you haven't already. Now, for this particular video, I am not really going to focus on the DLC races, though to be honest, when it comes to the DLC races, I don't think any DLC race is really worth getting, at least not through the race pack, with the exception of the Chaos Dwarfs. The reason for other race packs is either the races have issues, like the Vampire Coast, or to a lesser extent the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings are playable, but they just have campaign issues with the Books of Nagash, how those are implemented, and so on and so forth. And with things like Beastmen, Wood Elves, with Wood Elves, Beastmen, Warriors of Chaos, you can play them in other ways, or they're just flat out pretty broken, like the Ogres or Norska. So those are some of the things to keep in mind with the race packs. But out of the race packs, the Chaos Dwarfs are worth it the most. But they're also the most expensive DLC, so the value proposition of the Chaos Dwarfs, while certainly high quality, is a lot to ask for. But they are absolutely unique when it comes to their playstyle. At number 5, we have the Champions of Chaos DLC. The basic Warriors of Chaos can be played by anyone that owns Warhammer 3 through Be'lakor. Of course, you can't play Archaon, Sigvald, or Kholek, but you can at least play the race. The Champions of Chaos add a huge amount of flavor to the Warriors of Chaos, for all the unique units, for all the dedication to the various gods. And of course, you do get 4 campaigns out of it, as well, as opposed to 3 through the race pack. Be'lakor is not part of the race pack. Be'lakor is just basically a reward for being able to play Immortal Empires. Originally designed as the idea that in order to play Immortal Empires, you had to own Game 1 and 2, but of course Creative Assembly changed that, and they just gave Be'lakor for free, and basic access to the Warriors of Chaos for free as well. So what do the Champions of Chaos give you? Well, you got to keep in mind that the value proposition here is obviously going to be lower than with DLCs from previous games, because those DLCs, having been out for a while, can be found at significantly better discounts. There's like a 25% discount on the Champions of Chaos DLC at the moment, whereas you can get the Warhammer 2 Lord packs for like a 50% discount if you don't already own them. But what you get, beyond the unique campaigns, like Valkia and Festus in particular, being certainly worthwhile to play as campaigns, and honestly a lot more fun to play than Archaon's campaign. Archaon's campaign, certainly he's very powerful, but it can get very boring very quickly. But what you're getting for this particular DLC is you're getting all of the unit variety that you would otherwise be lacking through the various marks of Chaos. So let's say you want to have some cavalry that's really good at charging. Well, Chaos Knights of Slaanesh are going to be incredible because they get devastating flankers. So that charge bonus of 60 turns into 120 when you're attacking an enemy from behind or in the flank, which is something you'd want to do with cavalry anyway in general. Or you get really durable Warriors of Chaos with grey weapons, or chosen with grey weapons if you follow Nurgle, or fast units if you follow Slaanesh, shielded units if you follow Tzeentch, and frenzied units if you follow Khorne. So there's a good deal of variety with that. Let's say you pick up the Champions of Chaos DLC and you play Be'lakor with them, you will get a lot more variety in your campaigns. Or you can play the dedicated campaigns, which do offer some of their own benefits. Like Valkia has a much better campaign than Skarbrand, for instance. And if you want to feel like you're playing a Tzeentch campaign or a Slaanesh campaign or anything like that, it is actually better to play these champions as opposed to the demons. The demons are pretty terrible. The champions are pretty great. They do offer a good amount of benefits and can lead to some very interesting campaigns. Though I admit I did struggle a lot with this 5th position placement on this list, because The first 4, not so much of an issue. No brainer, as far as I saw it. The 5th position, I could have introduced Take a Claw over here, but I decided not to. There's just too many issues with that. And while certainly I think Take a Claw was great when they first introduced him, I don't think he's aged all that well in Warhammer 3. He's still very strong, but issues with that. So, Champions of Chaos, it is. At number 4, we have the Sisters of Twilight of the Wood Elves in the Twisted and the Twilight DLC for Warhammer 2. Now, one of the biggest values of this DLC is that it allows you, or it allowed you in Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3 to get access to the Wood Elves as a race. Even though you couldn't obviously play the other Legendary Lords, you could confederate them when they introduced this DLC. I'm not quite sure how things work right now, because I do obviously own all of the games, so it can be difficult figuring out how things are going to be for someone who just owns Warhammer 3. Please let me know. But when they originally introduced the Sister of Twilight, the value of this package was amazing. You could play the Wood Elves, you had the entire existing Wood Elven roster, and you got more units for it. You got the hero type with the Spellweavers, which, while they're certainly not as good as the Branch Wraiths when it comes to overall campaign benefits, because those offer replenishment, they are obviously pretty solid spellcasters. And having good hero spellcasters is actually important in a lot of campaigns. On top of that, beyond the access to the Wood Elves, the rework to the Wood Elves that also came with this DLC, though that was available for free for everyone that already owned the Wood Elves, you didn't need to buy this DLC to get that rework. But on top of that, you also got the Legendary Lord for the Skaven, who also had a unique playstyle for a Skaven, very different than all the other Skaven Legendary Lords. Like, when you look at the Skaven DLCs, like, every DLC Legendary Lord for a Skaven has their own unique and very solid playstyle. Fraton Clean does suffer because he is in Kislev, and Kislev does suck from a design perspective on the campaign map, because kind of really hasn't evolved since Warhammer 1 when it comes to the map design in the Kislev area, and there's a lot of issues with that. Hopefully that will be changed with the Kislev DLC that is going to come out, and hopefully will include a rework, but we will see about that. Suffice to say though, you get 2 Legendary Lords, you do get Legendary Heroes as well for these races, for both Fraught and the Sisters of Twilight. You can also get access to a Legendary Hero with Orion, if you're playing his campaign, though honestly his campaign is pretty damn boring to do so. And on top of that, beyond the units, beyond the Legendary Lords, the heroes, the Legendary Heroes, you also get access to the unique playstyles on those Legendary Lords. In the sense that if you're playing a Wood Elven campaign, as an example, typically speaking, what you're going to want to do is get Archers and Treekin. Those are the main units you'd be using in every Wood Elven campaign, including this one. But what the Sisters do in particular is they give you a unique playstyle in the sense that they significantly buff up the Hawk Riders. So Hawk Riders are flying ranged skirmisher units, basically, or ranged flying units. They're decent enough, but you usually wouldn't get them because the ground units are going to do better. Not with the Sisters, though, on a faction-wide level, because not only do they get an ammo benefit, which is very important for the Wood Elves, they get the Volley of Kurnos ability for Hawk Rider units. 1 ability usage, which they can buff to 2 once they finish up getting everything in their special skill line. And this is faction-wide. And what that Volley of Kurnos ability does is a significant amount of damage to a unit that's targeted, with a lot of armor-piercing damage as well. This is a cruise missile. This does a significant amount of damage. While it won't wipe out units in a single use, in 2 uses you are really dropping a lot of units to very, very low HP. Though we're not talking here about single entities or units with few models, but like units with a decent amount of models, they're going to take a lot of damage from those abilities, from that ability. So you can really make a flying army work very, very well with the Sisters of Twilight. In fact, I think they have the best flying composition of any faction and any Legendary Lord in the game because of that. And then on top of that, they have the Forge of Dave. The Sisters of Twilight were so strong when they originally came out that they ended up being the best Legendary Lord for the Wood Elves for a very long time. In a lot of ways, they are still really good. While Draca has her insane malevolent Treekin to work with, the sisters do better in terms of like building a massive empire in a campaign because of all the items they can get through the Forge of Death and the various benefits that those items do provide. They have a lot of potential, they have a unique playstyle, they have relatively easy access to a legendary hero, and their campaign can be a lot of fun to play because annihilating your enemy from the air with Hawk Riders can actually be a good amount of fun. At least in the short term. Wood Elves do have issues in terms of like finishing their campaign because it just ends up being too passive compared to how Warhammer 3 is played these days. But the value proposition here is significant. You get access to a race that for which you would otherwise have to buy a race pack that may end up actually being more expensive, by the way, than this DLC. You also get the Legendary Lore for Skaven that gives their unique playstyle. Those Legendary Heroes are also useful. So if you want to play the Wood Elves, this is the DLC for you. Really, in a significant number of ways. Like, this is where I would start with this DLC before buying the race pack, assuming that does work. And keep in mind, you can also confederate Durfu, you can confederate Orion, or you could, again, not entirely certain how that works right now with the changes that Creative Assembly has made. But for the longest period of time, this was really a good value proposition for a DLC and still remains so. At number 3, we have the Warden and the Paunch DLC. This adds things for the High Elves and the Greenskins. The High Elven stuff is nice to have. You get the new lore type, which can be pretty useful, especially when you're starting out a campaign, because Archmages can have no negative trait. The way it works for High Elves is if you don't have influence to spend, you can only recruit lords that have negative traits. Well, that's certainly the case with Archmages as well, but the negative traits they may get may not matter. Like, oh, Phoenix recruitment decreased by 1 turn. That really is very significant when you almost never use Phoenixes in a High Elven campaign. So Archmages are useful. Having Caster Lord can be useful, though generally I prefer relying on heroes, but certainly important for the High Elves who do require tier 4 in order to increase their caster capacity. Also Silvering Guard as Spearman unit, and Alfarian the Grim having a High Elven campaign focused on dealing with the Greenskins in the Battlelands. So all of that is really good, but it's really the Greenskin side of things that wins out for this DLC. And it makes sense because they did devote a significantly higher amount of resources for the Greenskins because this DLC also came with the Greenskin rework. The way Creative Assembly does things is that for quite a few DLCs, they basically use the resources that they have for a DLC to rework a race one way or another, like the Greenskins as an example. And then they make that available for free when the package comes out. Now, what did this DLC come with for the Greenskins? Well, at the high tier, you do get the Rogue Idol, which can be pretty damn substantial in terms of its power level if you do get to tier 5. And Greenskins have great growth and potential to get a lot of money. Grom's campaign as well is really good, at least in the short term, because while he starts in Unpleasant Climate, he is so ridiculously powerful with his cauldron that he can literally print money and he can overcome this. And his campaign is focused on beating Wolf-1, which is actually a really fun experience because the High Elves, well, conquering Wolf-1 is no easy affair because the High Elves are actually a pretty powerful race. So you end up with this campaign that, while in the long term you are going to have problems building a massive global empire because of the climate situation, the suitability of climate that Grom has, it leaves quite a bit to be desired. He does have a lot of potential in terms of having a fun and entertaining campaign between his cauldron and his conquest of Wolf-1 in the short term. But what's more important from a value proposition is what you're also getting with this in terms of hero and some unit types, not just a Rogue Idol. You do get the pump wagons, those can be okay, but really what's more important here are the trolls. So you get the ability of recruiting river trolls and stone trolls with this DLC. Now, stone trolls in particular are important. A lot of battles are going to be sieges in walled settlements, and stone trolls, they're siege breakers. They're really good siege breakers. They have decent enough armor. Their leadership does obviously leave a lot to be desired, but they have siege breaker, they have decent enough armor. Most of their damage is armor piercing. Like, they're just an upgraded version of regular trolls, so they'll be used more throughout the campaign, if not throughout the entirety of the campaign. And you can just take these guys, through the gates of a settlement, and many times you will discover that these guys can actually win in those siege scenarios against a lot of foes. They're just really that durable, and they do have their regeneration aspect to them. Like, I generally get like 4 stone trolls in an army for the purposes, just the express purpose of siege, and also having some very strong and durable monstrous infantry to use in open field battles. Not so much with the river trolls, though they can certainly fill a role in an army as well, because, well, they can reduce the melee attack of enemy units, which can be useful, though most of the time I do prefer getting the stone trolls. Far more importantly, though, is the Giant River Troll Hag for every Greenskin campaign. You get a hybrid melee caster hero that gives you replenishment. And this is the only way Greenskins can get a replenishment on the campaign map, or the only hero that can increase their replenishment. And having good replenishment is so important in every single campaign, because it allows you to far more easily recover from battles, it allows you to skip some battles, to auto-resolve them, and just replenish very, very quickly. The Greenskins certainly don't have bad replenishment, but having a hero replenishment in Warhammer 3, I would argue, is pretty essential. Unless you're the Chaos Dwarves, but the Chaos Dwarves just make up for having better sources of replenishment elsewhere. And the crucial thing about the Stone Trolls and the Giant River Troll Hag is you can recruit them from any tier 3 settlement. So you can get a lot of capacity, get a lot of replenishment, get a lot of Giant River Troll Hags in your campaign. This is the case for the heroes in general of the Greenskins, but value proposition-wise, between how fun Grom's campaign can be, the units, the hero, and as well as the things that the High Elves get, this is certainly a good DLC to pick up and really enjoy. Like, I do love Grimgore, sure, but this is the one Greenskin campaign that I've played again and again in Warhammer 3 and had a blast doing so, at least in terms of the short-term campaign. At number 2, we have the Shadow and the Blade DLC that involves the Skaven and the Dark Elves. Now, for the Dark Elves, the only part that I would say is really relevant from this DLC is the Master Hero, which can be really useful. You can get a lot of them pretty quickly in your campaign. They can give you a great deal of combat potential and really help you steamroll as the Dark Elves. Well, getting a lot of hero capacity, which the Dark Elves can do pretty early, from very early on in their campaigns, does help them. And having more hero types does help them as well. There's a lore type as well. There's units, of course, but those don't really matter as much. Though they do give you some different options to play with the Dark Elves, but the main style of playing the Dark Elves with Blackheart Corsairs and Dark Shards is the best one to engage in. On the Skaven side of things, however, this DLC is incredible. I think Snitch has, hands down, the best Skaven campaign in the game at the moment. The reason behind that is you do start with a good province over here that you can conquer very easily. You do start in Cafe with all of the benefits that come from Cafe. Cafe is a really well-designed part of the campaign map, which is kind of funny when you think about how bad Cafe is in Realms of Chaos. But for Immortal Empires, they really did a great job with making Grand Cafe unique. Like different enemy types, different climate types. It's like its own self-contained universe of a game here, and honestly, you can play an entire campaign just Grand Cafe and enjoy yourself a great deal. So that's one of the things that Snitch has on offer. On top of that, compared to, say, Ikeclaw, who also has a great deal of power like Snitch, you don't get frustrated because your territory is limited, because you do have some really great territory available for conquest that will make you a powerhouse. See, Skaven do need provinces with multiple regions in them, easily accessible, that will allow them to increase their economy, recruit units, and so on and so forth. On top of that, you start with the ability of recruiting Night Runners and Night Runners with slings, and early on in any Skaven campaign is really worth using those units. Later on, you will diversify depending on the Legendary Lord you are using, but Snitch is better with that particular playstyle of Night Runners and then into Gut Runners than the other Skaven Legendary Lords, because he gets a faction-wide benefit of giving them armor-piercing ranged damage. So their missile attacks are going to do mostly armor-piercing damage. That's one. Those are just some benefits. You do also get a hero type, the Escian Sorcerer, which isn't necessarily too important, but he is decent enough as a support hero. More importantly, you get the Master Assassin Lord. And the reason Master Assassins are so great is because they give you Shuriken Jutsu as well as Expert Ambusher to an army. Even if you're not using Night Runners and Gutter Runners, the Master Assassin is still a phenomenally good lore choice simply because of the ambush success chance. Because Skaven's main stance is stock chance, so you always have a chance to ambush an enemy army. There can be some drawbacks with this, like let's say there's an army next to a settlement. If you attack it normally, you draw the garrison out. If you ambush it, you're just ambushing it. You don't draw the garrison out. That is that one downside, but overall the Skaven do have a significant benefit in a campaign by having a chance of ambushing an enemy with every attack. And Master Assassins do increase that chance by 15%, because stock chance by default has a lesser ambush success chance, and you increasing it with your special skill line makes it worth it. Also, Snitch doesn't have to deal with loyalty either. And then, the units that this DLC adds, like Ashen Triads, Warp Grinders, and Poison Wind Mortars are phenomenally good units. Or at least the Warp Grinders and Poison Wind Mortars are. Like the Poison Wind Mortars are quote-unquote the best artillery that the Skaven do have, though whether or not you want to consider them as an artillery piece, that's a different discussion altogether. But they do a significant amount of damage all the same. They have magical attacks, so they can bypass physical resistance. Most of their damage is going to be armor-piercing damage, and they also do damage per second with Poison Wind. They are a high-level unit. Warp Grinders, on the other hand, they also have magical attacks. Most of their damage is still armor-piercing. They have Vanguard deployment, Siege Attacker, and quite importantly, they have Wall Breaker. In fact, when I'm dealing with Skavens in campaigns, most of their armies are not things I'm concerned about. I am concerned about being ambushed when I'm dealing with them, but the one unit type that does give me pause, because Skaven AI does love to recruit them, are actually the Warp Grinders. They're quite durable, which is actually very rare for Skaven, and they will do well in field battles, and they'll also do pretty well in sieges because they have fewer models, so they don't get stuck in the choke points in sieges. They can get through those choke points and do a ton of damage. Obviously, monstrous infantry units are better for that particular purpose, but having the ability of breaking down walls is an enormous advantage in any siege situation. Like, Snitch has a great campaign, has great campaign mechanics, has good units with this DLC. Like, if you're gonna buy any Skaven DLC, this is the one I would start with, and then go with Ticket Claw. You also have a diplomatic benefit with other Skaven factions because of the clan contracts. Of course, you can also lose on the diplomacy side of things, but the fact that you can get up to 40 diplomatic relations with other Skaven factions means you have a good chance of actually confederating them, or at least engaging in diplomacy with them, which gives you options that the other Skaven Legendary Lords don't have, because one of the problems in Skaven campaigns is actually confederation, and you just are going to struggle to be able to pull it off. Now, to be very clear, it is likely, like with some factions, like if you're thinking about Skrulk, Clan Pestilent, it's likely you won't be able to confederate them before they get overwhelmed by their enemies. On Legendary difficulty, at least the Skaven AI does lose the war, but at least you do have the option to eventually do so. And here's the thing, because they lose most of the time, like the most important thing about shadowy dealings and clan contracts, beyond the benefits you can gain, like eliminating a faction leader completely, sure, you're probably only going to use this once in an entire campaign, but beyond the benefits here that you get, one of the things that these give you, beyond diplomacy, is that it also gives you vision on the other Skaven factions. And having vision is quite useful because, let's say I gain vision with Fraught done clean over here in Help It, right? Then what I can do is go to Fraught and declare war on his enemies, generally Kislev, get an increase in diplomatic relations, and with the other diplomatic relations that you do get through clan contracts, you can really get a lot in diplomacy. So eventually, when Fraught does eventually lose his armies and it's basically down to Help It, you can then click that Confederation button and voila, you have the ability of building an empire over here in Help It. And that is available for the other Legendary Lords of the Skaven as well. So there's a lot of potential in Snitches' campaign, and there's a lot of interesting mechanics and some very useful things for Skaven in general, between Master Assassins, Warp Grinders, and Poison Wind Mortars. And finally, and number 1, it is the Silence and the Fury DLC for Warhammer 2 that has affect the Lizardmen and the Beastmen. For the Beastmen, it is easier and cheaper access to the Beastmen race than just buying the race pack. Sure, you only get one Legendary Lord as opposed to the free that you can get with the Call of the Beastmen DLC. But Tarax is the best Legendary Lord for the Beastmen, and this DLC also gives you 2 extra unit types for the Beastmen as well. And while certainly Tarax had a rough start in his campaign, he does have the highest potential, and honestly it is the most interesting campaign anyway to play of the Beastmen as a whole. Though I certainly think that while Creative Assembly did a great job in Warhammer 2 in remaking the Beastmen, the translation from Warhammer 2 to Warhammer 3 hasn't necessarily been the best, though that's the case for quite a lot of races. Though still, to be clear, the Beastmen are a fairly solid race, just not the ridiculous Tide of Death that they were at the end of Warhammer 2. And then for the Lizardmen, you have Oxyatl. Oxyatl plays far different than all the other Legendary Lords of the Lizardmen. So does Tarax compared to the other Legendary Lords of the Beastmen. Oxyatl's armies are focused on getting a bunch of these skirmisher infantry units, specifically Chameleon Skinks and Chameleon Stalkers. Now, the units themselves that get added in this DLC for the Lizardmen don't necessarily matter as much. Yes, you do get a hero choice. Yes, you do get like some special units as well that do help you with this particular playstyle. But what I would say is the best value for this DLC is how Oxyatl's campaign plays out, because it is a very interesting campaign to play, because it's going to be very different every single time you play it. See, if you, and sorry for the lag over here, the map is certainly lagging in Warhammer 3, you do start over here in the Sarencast Waste, and you can stay there. How did I make my way next to Karakudrun by turn 11? Well, you get teleporting missions that teleport you around the map. You can also always teleport with Oxyatl and his armies to your capital, so you can bounce back and forth between your capital and other parts on the map where you have these missions. This is kind of like XCOM, where you do have a variety of threats popping up on in the world that you do have to deal with. And these missions, they give you significant rewards, like 10% income from sacking settlements, ammunition for all armies, missile strength, blessed units as well, money, blessed chameleon skinks, etc., etc. So you can really make you can really gain a significant amount of power. In fact, the very first mission you start with is to eliminate the minor faction of Khorne over here, which you can do in 2 turns, and you start a war with. And that gives you 5,000 money, so you're off to a great start. And what I like about this campaign is because of the missions and the fact that whenever you get the mission you can teleport to the location, you do have the ability of building an empire across, well, the entire world, as it were. You have every climate suitable to you if you're playing Oxyatl. So you can colonize across the entirety of the world, and you can show up like over here. I just showed up over here and wiped out Azag, and now I'm going to start building an empire over here while also dealing with the other missions I'm going to have. It does certainly make for a campaign that is far more interesting to play and far more replayable than any other campaign in the game. It gives you access to the Beastmen, as I mentioned. It gives you access to the best Legendary Lords for 2 different races. Good units, at least certainly for the Beastmen as well. And overall, it is the best value package at the moment in Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Like, if you want to play a Beastman campaign, Tarax is the way to go. If you want to play a Lizardman campaign, Oxyatl is the way to go. By far and away, far ahead of all the other Legendary Lords for their respective races. And that is all there is to say. Keep in mind, of course, that the Chaos Dwarves, if they were cheaper at a bigger discount in the future, are probably going to be the best value proposition, but at the moment they are certainly the most expensive piece of content, though they do add a huge amount of content without DLC. Just too expensive, most expensive DLC in the history of Total War. Anyway, Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. Next up, some of the worst value propositions in terms of DLC, as well as some of the most essential DLCs, because the DLCs that are in this video are not necessarily essential for you to enjoy the game or to enjoy specific races, certain factions in the game. There are certainly DLCs that I would not play certain races without. Stay tuned for more.